Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to explain how I quickly and easily gather data during my literacy small groups. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I would love for you to do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you don't miss out on any of the videos or freebies that I post about teaching literacy. Okay, so first and foremost, why gather data? Data to me just has this connotation of like testing and trying to get the other kids to be quiet so you can pull one-on-ones, and it just kind of has this like icky connotation. I think especially in the primary grades where it's a little bit hard to get assessment data and a lot of your stuff has to be done one-on-one. However, gathering purposeful data for your small groups is so important. And that's because you have limited time with each small group. And if you are not crystal clear on what each kid needs to work on, then what you're gonna end up doing is planning these like lessons that are like good in practice, but don't make the very best use of your time. So something that's really key when you're planning your small groups is you don't necessarily wanna follow this like format in lockstep. You want to make sure that what you're doing with each group is really what that group most needs. And if you don't have the data to know what each group most needs, then you're not going to be able to do that. Another reason why it's so important to have that data is because you will need to change up your small groups sometimes. If a kid is doing better or if they fall a little behind, you want to know that and be really clear on that so that you can move them into a different group. Your small groups, you know, there may be some kids where they stay more or less in the same small group throughout the year, but they should be flexible. They should be dynamic. Sometimes you may even totally mix things up and say, I want to really focus on like this fluency strategy or this comprehension strategy. And you might not have kids that are necessarily at the same like reading level or phonics level in that group to work on that strategy. But again, if you don't have this data, then you're not going to be able to form these groups and make sure that they're flexible. So data for small groups is key. Now let's talk quickly about what types of data you might want to gather. And honestly, this is going to depend greatly on what grade you teach and even what point it is in the school year. Because for example, at the beginning of the year, a lot of your first graders might not be reading a lot, but toward the end of the year, hopefully they're reading a lot more. Same with kindergarten, right? At the beginning of this school year, they may be working on their letters and then they're not reading until later in the year. So the type of data that we're looking for could change a little bit throughout the school year. I'm going to throw out some general things you might look for, but again, you're going to have to take this and apply what you need to your group of students. So one thing you might look at to make groups and figure out what you're doing in groups is phonemic awareness, specifically like blending and segmenting. Another thing you might look at is their letter name and letter sound knowledge, usually most applicable to kindergarten. Another thing you might look at is maybe they're sounding out CVC words and vowel consonant words because they're beginning to read, but there's a difference between kids who are ready for like a complete CVC decodable text versus kids who take a while to get through just like one or two sentences, right? So as they're learning to read, you might need to look at, okay, what is the fluency? What is the speed at which they can decode CVC words, right? And then when we get up into, kids are reading a little bit more, what phonics skills have they mastered? Have they not mastered? That can help you with making your groups, figuring out what you're focusing on in each group. And so some kind of phonics inventory is really helpful so you can see, oh, well, they've mastered our control vowels, but we haven't mastered, vowel teams yet. So you want to have that information so you know what types of words to work on with the group. Then there's also fluency, right? And, of course, there's certain things where maybe it's better to teach in whole group, like you're really working on expression. That's, you can work on that in small group for sure, but I don't necessarily make small groups based upon how expressive a kid is with their reading. However, I might look at reading rate, right? And reading accuracy, because I want to see like how quickly can they read? Are they sounding things out very slowly? Do they have a higher level of fluency? That's going to inform how the groups look. And it's also going to inform, like what we're actually working on. Because if you think about two kids, maybe they score the same on their phonics inventory, but one decodes much more slowly. you might need to have them in a different group, because if you're reading text, they're going to go through that text so much more slowly. So this is why it's so important to look at not just one data point, but multiple data points when you're considering your groups. Another thing you will probably want to look at is comprehension. So especially as kids start to decode a little bit more, what kind of scaffolding and support are they going to need to be successful with their comprehension? Can they retell? Can they answer inferential thinking questions that require them to, read between the lines, so to speak, maybe use their background knowledge or different points of information in a text to make an inference? Can they do that kind of stuff? Now, as long as my kids are reading, we're always working on comprehension in small groups, but still understanding where they're at with comprehension will help you provide like the right kind of activities. And then if you have kids who maybe are comparable in terms of like what they can decode and even their fluency, but there's a big difference in what they need comprehension wise, in second grade, you might decide to put them in different groups. So there's a lot of things to think about, but these are some of the types of data that you may want to gather. Now, that might seem like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. So let's break this down, and I want to show you how easy it really can be. Number one, hopefully your school has some kind of screener or like benchmark assessment system in place where you're gathering data like a couple of times a year, because that data can inform your small group instruction. So hopefully you're doing some of this already. But the other thing is that we need to be constantly gathering data. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be time consuming. I'll give you some examples in a second here, but we want to make sure, we don't just look at kids beginning, middle, and end of year. Like, how are they doing in between? And what are they struggling with? What do they need to work on? So that's where this kind of like on the fly data gathering process really comes in handy. So that's what I'm going to show you next. I'm going to go through some example lessons from this free download. You can look in the caption to grab it. It's called Small Group in a Snap, and it just has a bunch of lessons for small group for kindergarten, first, and second grade. So you can kind of see how I set up my lessons. And I'm not necessarily going to go in a ton of detail on what we're doing in the lessons. You can grab the free download to check that out. What I really want to focus on is how I integrate data gathering into lessons I'm already teaching to save me time and also give me the information that I need about my students. I'm going to do the first and second grade example first, but then we'll also talk about kindergarten and how that would, might look a little bit different. Okay, so this lesson, which again, you can get for free in the caption, it's about, it's using a text called It Was Boxing Day. And this is a fiction text. And so before the kids read, you're going to introduce it, you're going to talk about it. But before you even sit down to do that, I always like to have some kind of warm up. Now, a really good warm up is to have them read. It could be fluency sentences, or it, could be a text that maybe you read in the previous lesson. I will just have that out on the table. So when the kids sit down, they will start to read the text, right? And what that does is it gives me an opportunity to do a little bit of assessment. Now, it has to be quick, right? It might be like I pull one kid to the side and there's a list of 10 words and they read them. And then I pull another kid. I might not necessarily get to pull all the kids in the group that day because I don't want the warm up to be very lengthy. But this is a chance to maybe check their phonics knowledge, or have them read like a passage that they read in the previous lesson, or even a cold read of a new text. How many words can they read in a minute? Which phonics skills are they missing? So that little snippet of time is a great opportunity for me to gather data. Now, like I said, I'm going to introduce the text to them, and then I'm going to have them whisper read the text. Now, often I like to be available to kind of see how the kids are doing, especially if they are kids who are still working on mastering the basic phonics skills and learning to decode. So I do like to be available. However, once in a while, it is perfectly fine to really focus on one kid and listen to them read. And this is a running record form. Running records, I think, in recent years have been getting a lot of bad press because there's something that's associated with like whole language and balanced literacy. But at the core, a running record is literally just you listening to a kid read and marking the words that they get wrong, the words that they self-correct. And then you could also do a timed read where, you're seeing how many words they read in a minute. They can keep reading beyond that minute, but that's a way to gauge fluency. You can even like, again, this is in small group in a snap, so you can get this for free to see what I mean, but here I have circled the student's fluency. Was it 1, very choppy, slow reading, 2, somewhat choppy or disfluent, 3, smooth reading at a good pace. You could even ask them a question or two for comprehension, right? Or have them retell. So again, when kids are reading the text for the day that we're focusing on with the group, a lot of times I like to be freed up to really work with multiple kids, but sometimes it's okay to maybe like really focus on one kid and do a little running record and see how they're doing. That can give you a lot of information on different points, right? And we've talked about kind of like the phonics, the fluency, the comprehension. Well, we haven't talked about comprehension. So with comprehension, that's something where whether it's the beginning of the lesson, the warm up, and you're having a kid read to you, you can ask them a couple questions, you can have them retell. So you can do these things on the fly, integrate it into your lesson, and they don't have to be like this whole other thing. Okay, so at the beginning, while the kids are warming up with maybe a fluency read or some other kind of activity, that's a great time to assess. And then sometimes while the kids are reading the text could be another opportunity, although again, we talked about like why I might not want to do that all the time. And then as far as other opportunities to assess, normally when I'm doing like a post-reading activity, like something with phonics, I'm having kids spell words, normally I'm very involved in that, so it doesn't present a lot of opportunities to, necessarily like pull one kid to the side and assess, because I'm providing feedback and, I'm really trying to use those small group minutes. However, this is really simple, but it's a time saver. When it's time for your kids to like switch to the next small group, if you have one child stay with you for just a minute or two, you can have them like read a list of 10 words to see how they're doing with a certain phonics skill. And the reason I say that is because they're already at your table, you're already sitting down, you have your stuff ready, like just have them stay for a second and do it. So that's another really simple way to sneak things in, as opposed to like, maybe another time of day, like calling a kid over, they have to stop what they're doing, they have to come over. Like the kids are already in physical proximity to you, so you can make the most of that time. Like I said, there's also kindergarten lessons in this freebie. So this is one of the kindergarten lessons. I do have one for kids that are reading, but I also have one for pre-readers. So you can kind of check out the differences between those. But with the kids who are reading in kindergarten, the lesson setup is pretty much the same, where I'll do some kind of warm up and then introduce the text. The kids will read it and then we'll do activities. So the opportunities for, assessing kids are very similar. With kindergarten, it's a little bit more challenging because sometimes your small groups are shorter. Sometimes it's harder to keep the other kids on task. So this is why I think it's really helpful to have some kind of warm up routine where they just sit down and they know what to do. You don't want to be explaining a new activity for a warm up, if you're planning on pulling a kid for assessment. If it's a warm up where like you're doing it with them and everybody's doing it, great. But if you want them to like read a book or maybe sort alphabet letters or put alphabet letters on, like a rainbow alphabet arc, just teach them and have them know what they're supposed to do so they sit down and you can immediately assess. Because that's the key to being able to assess, is having these predictable routines where kids know what to do so you have that little bit of extra time. So pretty much all the same strategies I mentioned for first and second grade would also apply to kinder. I generally don't do a ton of, like the running records that I talked about during the new read of the text with kindergarten, because they're learning how to decode and I want to be available for them. But again, once in a while, if you need to do that, I think that's fine. But the warm up really is where I tend to gather the most data. And then, like I said, if you want to keep a kid or two, while the others are rotating to the next group, then that's a great way to just have a kid. They're already there. You can do it real quick and then you move on. So pretty similar opportunities with the first and second grade lesson, or compared to the first and second grade lesson too. As you can see, there's a lot to think about when it comes to planning your small group lessons and assessing, but hopefully this gave you some ideas to make assessment a bit quicker and easier. And again, if you want all these free resources, there's like a fun graphic organizer too for a comprehension strategy activity with the first and second grade lessons. You can get all of these for free to see how I set up. my small group lessons, so check the caption for more information. I hope that this was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in a comment. Would always love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. Before you leave, it would mean so much to me if you hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.